Why this innocent 911 call sent him to death row. Before we descend into the darkness of the Archer case, make sure you've locked your doors. If you want to survive the true stories the world tries to hide, hit that subscribe button, ring the bell, and leave a comment below if you're brave enough to tell us what you think really happened. Now, let's begin. The silence of Blackwood Creek was shattered at 3:14 a.m. by a sound that would haunt the local dispatchers for the rest of their careers. It wasn't a scream that chilled them. It was the lack of one. When the 911 call connected, there was only the rhythmic, wet sound of heavy breathing, followed by a voice so calm it felt like a razor blade against skin. I think something has happened to my wife," Thomas Archer whispered. Thomas was a prominent local architect, a man known for his precision, his expensive suits, and his unwavering devotion to his high school sweetheart, Elena. But as the first responders raced toward the Archer estate, a sprawling, modern glass fortress perched on the edge of a jagged cliff, they had no idea they were walking into a crime scene designed by a master structure. Officer Miller was the first on the scene. The front door was standing wide open, swinging gently in the bitter October wind. The house was a masterpiece of minimalism, all white marble and sharp angles. But tonight, the pristine floors were marred by a trail of dark, viscous fluid that began in the foyer and disappeared into the shadows of the master wing. Miller found Thomas Archer sitting on the floor of the kitchen, his back against a polished mahogany island. He was cradling a phone, his knuckles white, his eyes fixed on a point in the distance that no one else could see. He didn't look like a killer. He looked like a man whose world had just collapsed. He was covered in blood, not splattered, but soaked, as if he had tried to hold a leaking vessel together with nothing but his bare hands. "She's in the study," Thomas said, his voice cracking. "I heard a noise. I thought it was the wind. When I got there, he was already gone." The study was a room of glass and paper. Elena Archer lay across her desk, surrounded by architectural blueprints that were now saturated in crimson. The sheer violence of the scene was a jarring contrast to the cold, calculated luxury of the home. There was no sign of forced entry. No shattered glass, no jimmied locks. Just Elena, a woman who had spent her life building dreams, lying dead in a house that had become a tomb. Detective Sarah Vance arrived 40 minutes later, her boots clicking sharply against the marble. She had spent 15 years in homicide, and her instinct told her that the Archer house felt less like a crime scene and more like a stage. Vance watched Thomas from the observation room of the precinct just hours later. He sat perfectly still. Most grieving husbands pace. They weep or they collapse. Thomas simply waited. When the interrogation began, he was cooperative, almost too cooperative. He detailed their evening. A quiet dinner, a bottle of expensive Cabernet, Elena retiring to her study to finish a project while he went to gym in the basement. He claimed he heard a thud and ran upstairs, only to see a shadow darting out of the glass, sliding doors that led to the cliffside terrace. "You didn't see his face?" Vance asked, leaning into the light. "It was dark," Thomas replied, his voice steady. "But I felt him. I felt the air move when he ran past me. I tried to save her, detective. I tried to stop the bleeding. That's why I'm covered in her." Vance played the 911 recording back for him. The calm in his voice was unsettling. But Thomas had an answer for everything. He was a man of logic, he explained. In a crisis, his brain switched to survival mode. He wasn't cold. He was focused. The forensic team, however, was finding a different story. The blood spray on Thomas's shirt wasn't just transfer from holding her. There were tiny, microscopic high-velocity droplets on his collar, the kind of droplets that only happen when you're standing directly over the source of the trauma. While Thomas sat in that cold room, a team of divers was scouring the base of the cliff behind the house. They expected to find a discarded weapon or a footprint in the mud. Instead, they found something that didn't belong to a burglar. Wrapped in a waterproof bag and wedged between two jagged rocks was a set of clothes, a black tactical suit, a pair of gloves, and a pair of shoes that matched the size Thomas Archer wore. But inside the bag, there was also a secondary burner phone. Detective Vance sat back down across from Thomas, the burner phone sealed in a plastic evidence bag. She placed it on the table between them. Thomas didn't blink, but the vein in his temple began to throb. We tracked the GPS on this phone. Thomas, Vance whispered. It hasn't been used to call a hitman. It hasn't been used to call a lover. In fact, it only has one number in the outgoing logs, a number that belongs to a prepaid SIM card activated 2 weeks ago. She leaned in closer, her voice dropping to a chilling murmur. Do you know where that SIM card is, Thomas? We found it in your wife's jewelry box, hidden behind a false lining. Your innocent 911 call wasn't the first call made from this house tonight. There was another call 30 minutes earlier, a call that lasted exactly 4 minutes, a call between you and the woman you supposedly just found dead. Thomas Archer finally looked up, and for the first time, the mask of the grieving husband slipped. A slow, terrifying smile spread across his face, one that didn't reach his eyes. You think you found a motive, detective? You found a tragedy. Elena was paranoid. She thought someone was following her. We used those phones to stay in touch without being intercepted. I was trying to protect her. Is that right? Vance countered. Then why did your wife's last text to that phone say, I know what you did in the basement. I'm calling the police now? The room went silent. The air felt heavy, charged with a sudden realization that the intruder Thomas described hadn't come from the outside. The monster had been inside the glass house all along. But as Vance prepared to signal the officers to move in for the formal arrest, her phone buzzed with a message from the lead forensic tech at the house. Vance's face went pale as she read the text. She looked at Thomas, who was still smiling that hollow, architectural smile. She realized then that the blueprints on Elena's desk weren't for a new building. They were the original schematics for the house they were currently standing in. Vance stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. Get the tactical team back to the Archer estate, she barked into her radio. Now! And get a sledgehammer. What is it? Her partner asked, rushing to her side. The blueprints, Vance gasped, her eyes locked on Thomas. The house is 2,000 square feet larger on the outside than it is on the inside. There's a void space behind the study wall. But when the police finally smashed through the reinforced drywall in the Archer study, they didn't find a hidden room or a stash of money. They found a series of high-definition monitors, all of them live-streaming from hidden cameras tucked into every corner of the local police precinct, including the very interrogation room where Thomas Archer was currently sitting in. Vance stood up abruptly, her chair screeching against the floor. Get the tactical team back to the Archer estate, she barked into her radio. Now! And get a sledgehammer. What is it? Her partner asked, rushing to her side. The blueprints, Vance gasped, her eyes locked on Thomas. The house is 2,000 square feet larger on the outside than it is on the inside. There's a void space behind the study wall. But when the police finally smashed through the reinforced drywall in the Archer study, they didn't find a hidden room or a stash of money. They found a series of high-definition monitors, all of them live-streaming from hidden cameras tucked into every corner of the local police precinct, including the very interrogation room where Thomas Archer was currently sitting. On the center screen, a message began to type itself out in real time. Thank you for the footage, detective. The world loves a good show. And then every light in the police station went pitch black. The darkness in the precinct was absolute, a heavy, suffocating weight that smelled of ozone and panic. In the interrogation room, the hum of the air conditioner had died, leaving only the sound of Thomas Archer's rhythmic breathing. Detective Vance reached for her sidearm, her fingers curling around the cold grip. But when the emergency red lights flickered to life seconds later, the metal chair across from her was empty. Thomas Archer hadn't just escaped. He had vanished into a building filled with armed officers. Outside the interrogation room, the precinct was a hive of redirected energy. Officers stumbled over furniture, shouting commands that were drowned out by the sudden, piercing shriek of the building's fire alarm. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was a synchronized digital execution. Every door controlled by the electronic security system, the holding cells, the evidence locker, the main exits, began to cycle, locking and unlocking in a frantic, clicking chorus. Vance sprinted toward the control center, her heart hammering against her ribs. She knew Thomas was a master of structure, but she hadn't realized that his mastery extended to the digital bones of a city. He didn't just build houses. He understood the systems that kept people safe and how to turn those systems into weapons. By the time she reached the lobby, the glass front doors had been deadbolt by the software. Thomas Archer was gone, and he had locked the police inside their own cage. Check the basement parking. Vance yelled, but she already knew he wouldn't be there. Thomas was a man of heights, not depths. While the city's tech task force fought to regain control of the precinct, Vance took a secondary team and raced back to the Archer estate. The void space they had discovered behind the study wall was the key. If the house was a living organism designed to watch the police, it was also designed to protect its creator. As the black SUVs roared up the winding cliffside road, the house stood on the horizon like a jagged tooth, glowing under the pale moonlight. They breached the house for the second time, but this time there was no pretense of a crime scene. It was a hunt. Vance led the way into the study, stepping over the ruined drywall they had smashed earlier. Behind the wall, the room was cold. The monitors they had seen earlier were now dark, but the air was humming. A faint, mechanical whirring was coming from beneath the floorboards. "He's not just hiding," Vance whispered to her partner, Miller. "He's finishing something." They found the entrance to the lower level hidden behind a pivoting bookshelf in the library. It wasn't a basement. It was a bunker. As they descended the narrow concrete stairs, the temperature dropped significantly. At the bottom, they found a room that looked like a high-end server farm. Blue LED lights pulsed along the walls, illuminating rows of humming processors. This was the brain of the Archer Empire, and in the center of the room stood a single, pristine desk. On it sat a laptop. Its screen glowed a map of the city's power grid. "You're late, Sarah," a voice echoed through the room. It wasn't Thomas. It was a recording, clear and crisp. By the time you read the data on this drive, the narrative will have already changed. "You see, Elena didn't just find out what I did in the basement. She helped me build it. We weren't a husband and wife. We were an architect and an engineer, and the world is about to see our final project." Vance moved to the laptop, her hand trembling as she touched the trackpad. The files were labeled by dates, years of surveillance data, not just on the police, but on the city's elite. Judges, council members, even the governor. Thomas hadn't been killing his wife to hide a crime. He was clearing the path for a massive, coordinated blackmail scheme that would put the entire state under his thumb. But then she found the folder titled The 314 Call. She clicked it. A video file opened. It was footage from the study on the night of the murder. Vance held her breath as the timestamp scrolled to 3 a.m. In the video, Elena Archer was sitting at her desk, just as they had found her, but she wasn't working on blueprints. She was crying. She was holding a syringe, her hand shaking violently. Thomas walked into the frame. He didn't look angry. He looked devastated. He knelt beside her, taking her hand. "It's the only way, Elena," Thomas whispered in the video. "If they find out about the system, they'll kill us both. But if you're the victim and I'm the monster, the data stays safe. The world looks at the murder, not the servers. They won't look behind the walls if they're too busy looking at the blood." In the video, Elena nodded, wiped a tear from her eye, and handed the syringe to Thomas. She leaned back against the desk, closing her eyes. Thomas didn't stab her. He didn't struggle with her. He kissed her forehead, injected her with a fast-acting sedative, and then, with surgical precision, he picked up the blade. Vance felt a wave of nausea hit her. It wasn't a murder. It was a ritual, a sacrificial play to protect the data in this room. Elena had agreed to die to ensure their life's work. The total surveillance and control of the state would remain undiscovered while the police focused on a simple domestic homicide. "He played us," Miller whispered, staring at the screen. "The 911 call, the blood on the shirt, the slip-ups. He wanted us to find him. He wanted us to think he was a sloppy killer, so we wouldn't look for the genius." Suddenly, the monitors in the room flared to life. Each one showed a different location in the city: the bridge, the water treatment plant, the hospital. And on every screen, a countdown began. 10 minutes. A heavy steel door slammed shut behind them, sealing Vance and Miller inside the server room. The air vents closed with sharp metallic snap. He's not just escaping, Vance realized, her voice filled with dread. He's cleaning the site. Through the monitors, they saw Thomas Archer. He wasn't at the docks or the airport. He was standing on the roof of the precinct they had just left, looking out over the city like a god surveying his creation. He held a detonator in his hand. "He's going to level the house," Miller shouted, throwing his shoulder against the steel door. "With us in it." Vance turned back to the laptop, her fingers flying across the keys. Try to find a kill switch, a back door, anything. But as the countdown hit the 5-minute mark, a new window popped up on the screen. It was a live feed from a hidden camera inside the very room they were trapped in. The camera wasn't focused on them. It was focused on the floor beneath the desk. Vance knelt down and ripped away a piece of the carpet. There, bolted to concrete, was a heavy iron ring. She pulled it, and a small hatch swung open. Inside was a narrow, dark tunnel that led straight toward the cliffside. "Go!" Vance urged Miller. They scrambled into the crawl space, the sound of the ticking servers fading behind them. The tunnel was tight, smelling of salt and damp earth. They crawled for what felt like miles, the sound of their own frantic breathing echoing in the dark. Finally, they burst out into the cool night air, tumbling onto a narrow ledge halfway down the cliff face. Above them, the Archer estate loomed, a silent monolith of glass and secrets. Then the world turned white. The explosion was silent for a split second before the roar hit them. The estate didn't just burn, it disintegrated. Thousands of pounds of glass, marble, and high-tech machinery were launched into the ocean. The shockwave nearly threw Vance off the ledge. She clung to a jagged rock, watching as the void space, the servers, and the evidence of Thomas and Elena's grand design vanished into the Atlantic. As the smoke cleared, Vance looked up at the moon. Her radio crackled to life. It was the precinct. "Vance, do you copy? We've got a situation at the morgue." "What now?" Vance gasped, her lungs burning from the dust. "It's Elena Archer." The voice on the radio was trembling. "The body we brought in, the woman from the study." "Detective, you need to get here." "The medical examiner just finished the preliminary." "The woman on the table?" "She's been dead for 3 days." But the 911 call happened tonight. Vance stared at the burning wreckage above her. If Elena had been dead for 3 days, then who was the woman she saw in the video? And more importantly, who did she just watch Thomas Archer kill in that study 2 hours ago? The revelation at the morgue sent a surge of ice through Detective Vance's veins. If the body on the slab had been dead for 72 hours, the woman she had seen on the security footage, the woman she had seen Thomas Archer sacrifice just hours ago, was an impossibility, unless the entire investigation hadn't been a hunt for a killer, but a guided tour through a hall of mirrors. Vance and Miller didn't wait for a transport. They commandeered a civilian vehicle at the base of the cliff and tore through the city streets toward the central morgue. The city was in chaos. The power grid flickered as Thomas's digital virus continued to eat through the infrastructure. When they arrived, the morgue was running on a chugging emergency generator, the fluorescent lights casting a sickly green hue over the stainless steel. The medical examiner, Dr. Aris, was standing over the body of Elena Archer. He looked up, his face pale. "Detective, look at the surgical scars on her neck and jaw," he whispered, pointing to faint, silver lines hidden behind the ears. "These aren't from life-saving measures. This is high-end reconstructive work. This woman didn't just look like Elena Archer. She was sculpted to be her." Vance leaned in. "You're saying this isn't Elena?" "Oh, it's her DNA," Eris replied. "But the woman you saw tonight, the one in the video, that was the real Elena. This body, this is a biological decoy. Thomas Archer didn't just build a house with a void space. He built a life with one. He's been keeping Elena's terminal illness a secret for years while they perfected the technology to disappear." Suddenly, the monitors in the morgue, the ones used for displaying X-rays, flickered. A grainy, black-and-white video began to play. It was a live feed from a private hangar at the edge of the city. Thomas Archer was there, standing next to a sleek, unmarked jet. Beside him stood a woman, her head wrapped in a silk scarf, her face partially obscured by dark glasses. It was Elena. She was alive, breathing, and holding a remote detonator. "Hello, Sarah." Thomas's voice came through the morgue's intercom system. "By now, you've realized that the innocent 911 call was the greatest performance of my life. It provided the legal window for Elena to be declared dead, the estate to be cleared of its secrets by fire, and for us to exit the stage. You were the perfect witness, detective. Your testimony will close the case. The world will hunt for a ghost, but they will never find the architects. You killed a woman tonight, Thomas." Vance screamed at the speaker. "The woman in the study. Who is she?" A long silence followed. Then the woman beside Thomas stepped closer to the camera. She lowered her glasses, revealing eyes that were identical to the woman on the morgue table. She was a volunteer detective. Elena's voice crackled through, devoid of any emotion. A woman with no family, no records, and a heart that was already failing. We gave her more in her final hour than the world gave her in a lifetime. We gave her a purpose. She became the foundation of our new world. The jet's engines began to whine, a high-pitched scream that echoed through the speakers. "The data you saw in the basement was just the tip of the iceberg," Thomas added. "The real servers are already airborne. We don't need to live in the city to control it. We built the cage, Sarah. You're just the one holding the keys for us while we're away." The screen went black as the jet roared down the runway and vanished into the midnight sky. Van stood in the silent morgue, looking down at the body of a woman who didn't exist, used as a pawn in a game played by people who moved like gods. She realized then that the 911 call wasn't a mistake. It was an invitation. Thomas wanted the police to see the murder. He wanted them to focus on the blood, so they would miss the heist. He hadn't stolen money or power. He had stolen the truth itself. Months later, the Archer case was officially closed. The public narrative was simple. A brilliant architect snapped, murdered his wife, and died in a fire explosion at his estate. But every night, at exactly 3:14 a.m., Detective Vance's personal phone would buzz once. No message, no caller ID, just a single rhythmic sound of heavy breathing, a reminder that the architects were still watching, still building, and still waiting for their next masterpiece. The glass house was gone, but the city was still their blueprint. And the most terrifying part? No one even knew they were living inside the walls. If this story sent a chill down your spine, don't forget to hit that like button and share this video with someone who loves a good mystery. We want to know where you're watching from. Let us know your city and country in the comments below. Also, we're planning our next deep dive into the world's most dangerous minds. Which prison or criminal mastermind should we cover next? Drop your suggestions in the comments, and make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next twist.